is protect and connect. First thing you have to do is protect, and then eventually connect with trails and paths and bridges and so forth. The Macatawa Green Space, which is the former Holland Country Club, is a site that we have been restoring over the past year, getting ready to open that as a new park here later this year. So we're excited about that because that has very defined water quality improvements. Water quality improvements by, constructed wetlands, best practices, buffer strips, other things that we know will have a positive impact on water quality in the watershed. We're in the middle of what probably will contribute very significantly to the water being cleaned up as it floods into these areas that we're sitting in. The silt will come out of it, the water will come out cleaner. It will add immediately to the water quality improvements.
By restoring some of the wetlands that have been lost, we will be able to begin to reestablish the floodplain and introduce some new filtering zones, natural filters, into the watershed to help clean up the sediment and nutrients that's bound in the water.
We probably wouldn't want to turn the whole area back into wetlands. Not very good for farmers who are growing crops, but if we can do it at a few select sites and design them to be as efficient as possible, we hope to have as big a bang for the buck as we can make with just a few areas.
These kinds of projects are important, but it can't all be that. We can't manipulate the whole environment. Certainly we need to work together closely in terms of our urban areas and making sure that the runoff is controlled. So we need to all work together and do more projects like this, but also work with the farmers and people in the residential and urban areas to build in more protections.
The other activities of the Macatawa Watershed Project still need to keep on going, and the most important things we do are public outreach, letting people know what the problems are, the steps they can take to improve the watershed.
The education of the community is the priority and is the lowest cost solution to get the biggest bang for the buck. If people know why the water quality is where it is, then people will make the right choice as to not affect poor water quality in the future.
There's also stormwater management with the townships and the cities and the drain commissioner and the road commissions and all the things they have to do to not only reduce stormwater, but care for the water quality of the stormwater as well. So there's a lot of other issues that we need to keep working on, keep momentum on, but it's really great to know that there's some action being taken with creating the wetland restoration areas that is going to be really beneficial for water quality for Lake Mac.
In order to clean up Lake Macatawa and the watershed, it was known that we had to determine the exact source points of the sediment, nutrient, and even bacterial pollution that was entering the system. And in order to do that, we had to set up sediment sampling sites and water quality monitoring sites throughout the watershed. Nearly 50 sites were set up to observe and monitor the water quality conditions within the watershed system over a course of about 2 years.
Hey, Bob. Hey, Travis. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Thanks for taking the time to meet with us today.
The whole thing about measuring the sediment coming down and actually putting numbers in, otherwise it's just a figment of a model.
Right.
And I think that's a type thing.
If we know where the sediment's coming from, we can begin to go to basically follow these streams back up and look, okay, is there going to be bank erosion here? Is there poor buffer strips? Is there a lot of soil erosion happening in any of these places?
If you got a small little sub-watershed like number 3 there, if there's a ton of stuff in it, that's worse than if there's a ton of stuff in 14, which is really big.
So these things are designed to sit in the stream. So when water enters this tube, it's only about 1/4 of an inch wide. Then it reaches the main body, which is about 4 inches. So when it reaches the larger chamber, it slows down and the water will stay in there for a number of hours and gives the water a chance to drop whatever it's carrying. It's a pretty simple measure of how much sediment has gone by. We knew that there were large amounts of sediment, and we found large amounts of sediment, but the areas that were contributing the most were a little different than what most of the models had predicted.
Where they have their money on that grant, the really hot spot where they're working down there, is in this area right in here, and it's not even, you know, on the original modeling, that was like one of the worst spots. We now, quote unquote, know what really is going on to the level that we've researched it to this point, but we can actually say, no, we've sampled this for 18 straight months. This is the amount of sediment coming down this one. This is the amount of sediment coming down this stream, and we have it all laid out. We can point to which sub-watershed as to which one is the dirtiest now.
We'd ideally hope that we would be able to tell, you know, this particular soil came from this particular area, this particular township, this particular field. We haven't gotten to the point yet where we can really be able to pinpoint things down to a very precise scale.
They did like 7 different analyses on that soil, and they were trying to look at it by grain size to see if they could tell which fields it came from by soil type, and it was so fine grained, they were just like, forget it. They can't even tell any of it apart. It's just tiny. So that was one of the things, but that's also part of the problem then, is because it gets bound up in the water and it's suspended, and you can't get it to even settle out because it's so fine grained, it just moves with the water.
The topsoil loss is affecting farming as well as it's affecting the lake water quality. For 150 years we've been farming, we've been deliberately turning the soil up to get this good rich soil up, and we've also then been exposing it to some additional fertilization. All of that comes downriver when it rains. And more than the current practices, but mainly the historical practices of turning the dirt up, exposing it to rain, and allowing it to wash down, has meant that our burden of dirt that washes into the river is much, much higher, 1,000 times higher than what was originally there. The actions of the farmers weren't unconscionable in those days. They just did what they needed to do to farm the land. Farming nowadays is more complicated. They have regulations, they've got to watch contained waste of animals, they've got to do all these other sort of things, and the farmers themselves don't want to lose soil, so they know better than that.
To improve the watershed, there needs to be a multitude of production practices being done. We need sediment traps, we need buffer strips, we need waterways, but we need to protect that soil.
Farmers, in my opinion, are great stewards because they received their farms from the generation before them and the practices that go with it. And they're going to be fully invested in doing all that they can to maintain the value of their farm in the long run.
Getting the buy-in from the agricultural community, or any community for that matter, in trying to solve these environmental issues is always one of the most difficult tasks that we face.
The challenge is you're working with private landowners, and you have to convince them of changing their business practices and still making sure that it makes sense for their bottom line.
Projects like this need to have a level of trust that, okay, if we find something, it's not about finger pointing, it's about let's figure it out and solve it, or else everyone runs for the doors.
Exactly.
It's good to have ground truth data that we've gone out and collected and measured in the field to be able to verify that the areas that we want to start to begin to address are really the areas that are the worst of the problem.
There are practices that are new, which are called things like cover cropping or no-till farming or large buffer strips. All these things are different practices, some of which will work, some of which won't. We don't know exactly which ones are the most effective here. But all those need to be tried, and they're being tried on an individual basis.
This stuff like this is a challenge. It takes time, and there's a balance between achieving economic objectives while also achieving long-term stewardship, and also just time to figure out what actually works. The more we can be aware and monitor and do problem solving, the more progress we'll make. Because we can look at models, and models are great, they get funding and stuff, but from a farmer perspective, you know, we can kind of see what's going on.
Sure.
We're looking at cover crops as being, you know, a step that could really fill a niche. They're saying cover crops stay green over the winter and feed the microbes in the soil and help for soil structure. That's kind of the revolution.
Can you harvest that at all, or is it just for cover?
No, it is just to hold the soil. And so you can see it's nice and green across there. When the water hits from rain, it will be buffered, and the chances of that soil eroding will be much less. This would be a 50-foot wide buffer strip with a county drain along the edge. And you can see the field is here, and so the water would move across. And so this would serve the purpose of catching soil and filtering anything that would come off. Heavy soil like this ultimately will be tiled every 40 feet in a system to have, so it's like a flower pot. And that helps with water management. Once those are in place, then you can start to look at tillage and residue management. So there's a progression of what we do. Our mission statement was, we will glorify God through careful and deliberate management of the resources we're entrusted. And so that becomes quite simple to fill in the blanks under that. I think it just takes a lot of effort, but we accept that challenge, and we're part of the community and realize the need for that.
For the most part, the ag community has been really supportive of our efforts, and I think that's important to recognize as well. It's more historical use of the land that we're trying to overcome now, and once we get beyond that, I think everybody has a role to play in keeping the water quality clean.
I think it's also key, too, that people understand that, you know, it's not just one group of people that have caused this to happen. It's happened over the years, and it's been something that is just, we finally have figured out, you know, a lot of the aspects that have played into why the lake quality is the way it is. And so whether it's acquiring land and returning it to its natural state, or cleaning up the tiles that are in the farmlands, or any of those aspects, that's what, you know, is going to help to make the lake a better place.
One of the things we did in studying Lake Macatawa was to try to see if there are other historical examples of lakes that have been recovered. The way in which we intend Lake Macatawa, or the Macatawa Watershed, to be cleaned up, are there examples out there where other communities have banded together to actually improve water quality? And the answer is there are distressingly few. There are examples where action has been taken and lakes have recovered.
The issues facing Lake Macatawa are relatively complex, but when you compare them to other systems that, you know, I've had the experience of working with, there are some things about it that make it a little simpler than, for example, Lake Okeechobee in Florida, which of course is the headwaters for the Everglades, where you, in addition to having runoff associated with crops, you also had runoff associated with livestock.
There are 5 times as many cattle in Okeechobee County as there are people, but we're within 150 miles of probably 15 million people, so it's very unique.
What really prompted the restoration of Lake Okeechobee was the early research that was done on the lake in the 1970s, where they discovered that there were a lot of nutrients that were coming into the lake.
So they did a lot of studies, they learned a lot about the lake, and they learned that it's phosphorus, they learned where it's coming from. This is a watershed that has a whole lot of dairies in it, and the dairies were really targeted heavily for phosphorus control because they bring in a lot of phosphorus and feed their cows, and so they were causing a lot of pollution.
Agriculture meant a lot, and it still does mean a lot to the economies of these communities here. So from that standpoint, how do you get agriculture to maybe change the mindset, to do some things differently, to reduce the amount of nutrients that are getting out into the basin?
There was some pretty good adversarial relationships started right at the beginning, because the farmers down there, that's very intense agriculture, and they felt like this is a threat to our very existence. And until they saw that there were management practices that they could easily establish and stay right in business and understood how to do that, it was touchy.
Trying to balance the competing demands for the water quantity and quality in Lake Okeechobee became a very, very difficult process. In fact, I used to joke that I knew I was doing my job well when everybody was equally pissed off at me.
But now I think most people in Okeechobee County in agriculture feel like, we can get along with this. Particularly for cattle ranching, it's not a big impact. We farmers tend to just stay out here and raise food and don't think that we need to talk to our city neighbors, and that's a mistake we're making. And I've preached that some. We need to get them out here and let them walk around and see and explain what we're doing and show them these kind of things. Then they really like that. They understand it. They get excited about it, and it's something we don't do enough of.
So we know a lot about the nature of the problem and where it came from. What we didn't really appreciate for the last 20 years was how big the problem was.
Originally, the Kissimmee-Okeechobee Everglades was one large connected ecosystem. And the thing that thrills me about what's going on now is people are starting to look at that and saying, wow, if we want to restore one component, we need to restore the other components as well.
As part of the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan, there are a number of very large projects that have been implemented north of the lake to capture that phosphorus before it gets into the watershed. And again, this points out that first you have to deal with these external loads coming off the watershed, which they're doing right now, and then it's a matter of dealing with the internal loads.